He hasn't said he's in love. He doesn't even bring it up. Yet, you feel something in his eyes, in the way he hesitates before leaving, in how he notices details no one else does. There's something there. But at the same time, it feels like he's trying to hide it. This contradiction leaves you confused. It seems like he's moving closer and pulling away at the same time. According to Carl Jung, this isn't just emotional indecision. This is a conflict between what the conscious mind wants to ignore and what the unconscious has already decided. Jung believed that true passion, when repressed, leaks through the cracks in behavior, through subtle gestures, moments of silence, and expressions the person doesn't even realize they're showing, but which reveal what they truly feel. If you learn to recognize these signals, you'll begin to see clearly what he's trying to hide, even from himself. In this video, you'll understand the psychological mechanisms that reveal when a man is more in love than he realizes, and why that makes him act in such contradictory ways. If you want to learn how to see the invisible within the male psyche through Carl Jung's deep psychology, subscribe to the channel now. Here, we explore what's hidden and what you're about to discover might completely change how you interpret his feelings. Her name was Lori. She was 32 years old, worked as a therapist, and had always been good at understanding other people's emotions, except her own, especially when it came to emotional relationships. For most of her life, Lori had tried to build deep connections, but somehow she always attracted the same type of man. Intense at first, full of enthusiasm, but who mysteriously withdrew as soon as things began to deepen emotionally. Then she met Rick, a friend of friends, intelligent, observant, someone who seemed to have control over everything around him. In the beginning, he was present, kind, curious. He paid attention to the smallest details. He knew the author of the Ibo book she was reading. He noticed her expressions when she spoke about something that moved her. He showed real interest. She felt like she had finally found someone with whom she could build something different. But as their encounters grew more intimate, something shifted. Rick began to show contradictory signs. He still reached out to her, but less often. He would go days without sending a message. And when he reappeared, it was as if nothing had happened. He said his mind was full, that he needed time, that he liked her, but wasn't sure if he was ready for something serious. This duality left Lori confused. In sessions with her own patients, she helped people name their emotions, recognize unconscious patterns. But when it came to her own experience, she felt paralyzed. She wondered if she was being too anxious, if she was asking for something that had never been promised. But the truth is, she could sense something he himself wouldn't admit. His eyes were full of feeling. The way he went quiet after she shared something intimate. The way he looked away when she brought up deeper subjects. All of it spoke volumes, said what his words refused to. Lori spent sleepless nights replaying conversations, trying to read the signs. But deep down, there was one truth she couldn't ignore. Rick did feel something intense, but there was also a block, something internal, silent, that kept him from fully opening up. Emotionally drained, Lori began rereading some of Carl Jung's old writings, and there she found a concept that changed everything. Jung spoke of the shadow, the part of our psyche that hides repressed feelings, unprocessed traumas, desires that clash with the image we want to have of ourselves. And the more we ignore this shadow, the more it controls our actions without us even realizing it. In that moment, Lori understood. Rick wasn't just confused. He was in internal conflict, a war between unconscious desire and the ego's defense mechanisms. And this conflict is devastating. It prevents true connection, silently sabotages relationships, and leaves invisible scars on both the one who loves and the one who is loved. From that point on, Lori began to see the whole story in a new light. And what she discovered is what you are about to understand in this video. From the moment Lori understood that Rick was trapped in an internal conflict, something began to shift in how she viewed his behavior. Not just his, but that of other men she had been involved with. And the more she immersed herself in Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the more she realized that this pattern was common. Men who approach with intensity but pull back when faced with vulnerability. Men who show interest but deny emotional involvement. Men who are in love but don't know they are. According to Jung, the unconscious acts as a reservoir for everything, not recognized by the conscious mind. This includes emotions, impulses, desires, and fears. When someone represses what they feel, that psychic energy doesn't disappear. It is simply pushed to the depths of the psyche, where it begins to act in hidden ways. This is where the concept of the shadow comes in. The shadow is everything the conscious mind refuses to see. And the more a person tries to maintain the image of control, rationality, and detachment, the stronger the force of what is being ignored becomes. Men like Rick were socialized to repress emotion. From an early age, they were told that showing feelings is weakness, that expressing too much affection is dangerous. Over time, this emotional repression becomes part of their personality. They truly believe they are in control. But when the unconscious is activated by a deep emotional connection, like the one Rick had with Lori, the armor begins to crack. He didn't understand why he felt such a strong need to be close to her, and, at the same time, such fear of surrendering. He didn't realize he had been touched in a part of the psyche he never learned how to handle. A place of real presence, of authentic affection. Jung stated that what does not become conscious returns as fate. In other words, the feelings we repress end up controlling us from behind the scenes. Rick didn't consciously decide to pull away from Lori. He simply reacted. Reacted to what he couldn't understand. And that's exactly what makes these situations so painful. There is no villain. There is no bad intention. There is only unconsciousness. And unconsciousness leads to distance, sabotage, and emotional disconnection. But here is the crucial point. Jung said the unconscious always sends signals, and those signals can be identified by those who know how to observe. The change in voice when speaking about love. The silence that follows a moment of truth. The stiffness in the body. The lingering looks. The excuses that don't add up. These are manifestations of the psyche trying to express what the conscious mind cannot yet admit. And when you learn to read those signals, you begin to see the emotional truth behind someone's outward behavior. Lori noticed that Rick avoided situations where the emotional atmosphere became too intimate. That he changed the subject when she talked about connection and presence. But she also saw how he went quiet after hearing a deep emotional truth, how he said goodbye slowly, how he always found an excuse to see her again. That wasn't disinterest. That was a man torn between deep attraction and the unconscious fear of what that attraction represented. And this is where a choice begins to appear. Because once you understand what's happening inside the other person's psyche, you no longer need to react with doubt or insecurity. You can act with clarity. You can observe with neutrality. You can choose how to position yourself with someone who is still trapped in their own shadow. And more importantly, you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop thinking you did something wrong. Because the truth is, many times, when someone pulls away from you, the problem is not in you. It is within them. But Lori's story doesn't end here. What happened next reveals even more about the dynamic between consciousness and the unconscious, and about the exact moment when repressed feeling becomes unavoidable. It is when the shadow emerges, when the ego loses control, when love can no longer be denied. And that is what we're going to reveal next. Carl Jung dedicated much of his life to studying the darker elements of the human mind. But what few people know is that he didn't create his theories out of thin air. Jung was a scholar of ancient traditions, religious symbols, alchemy, Eastern philosophy, and sacred texts that date back thousands of years. He believed that the human psyche has always carried the same archetypes, universal inner forces that shape our emotions, attitudes, and relationships. And among these archetypes, one of the most important is the Anima and the Animus. According to Jung, every man carries within himself an unconscious image of the feminine. This image is not based on direct experiences, but on a kind of ancestral psychic memory. Jung gave this archetype the name Anima. When a man falls in love with a woman, especially when the passion is intense and inexplicable. He's not only reacting to who she is consciously, he is projecting onto her his anima, the repressed, sensitive, emotional, and intuitive part of himself. He sees in her something he lost or never allowed himself to integrate. And that's why the impact can be so strong. Because this woman, without knowing it, awakens in him a part of his soul that was asleep, a part he doesn't know how to handle. This explains why many men are drawn to women who challenge them emotionally. Women who don't fit the stereotype of control, who affect them on levels they can't even name. In Rick's case, Lori was that mirror. She touched a part of his psyche that was hidden, and that contact activated the shadow. In the tradition of alchemy, which Jung studied deeply, there is a concept called conjunctio. It's the moment when opposites unite, the masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow. But this process, before generating harmony, brings chaos. First comes the dissolution of the ego, the destruction of false certainties, the confusion, the fear. Only after that, if there is enough courage, comes transformation. That's why many flee before reaching this point, because it takes more than passion. It requires internal confrontation. Jung said that true love doesn't happen between two people who simply like each other. It happens when both are capable of enduring the impact of projection and working on integration. This means recognizing that what the other awakens in me says more about me than about them. And that is revolutionary, because it breaks the illusion that the problem is always external. When Rick found himself drawn to Lori, he wasn't just dealing with her, he was facing himself. And that paralyzed him. On top of that, there is another factor that makes this process even more difficult. In modern society, men are not prepared to deal with their own vulnerability. They are taught to perform, to seduce, to conquer, but not to feel, let alone sustain the emotional impact of a real connection. And since the unconscious doesn't forgive what is ignored, sooner or later, it demands attention. That demand comes in the form of anxiety, distance, sudden emotional crises. It's the unconscious signaling that something unresolved is asking to be seen. But Jung was not a pessimist. On the contrary, he believed that suffering has a function. It is the beginning of awareness, the starting point of transformation. And that's what Lori came to understand through studying his work. She realized that if she could interpret the signs, she could see beyond surface behavior. And more than that, she could help break the cycle. Because consciousness is contagious. When one person changes how they see, they change the structure of the relationship. And sometimes, that change is enough to awaken the other. But how can we recognize the hidden signs that someone is in love even when they try to hide it? How can we tell the difference between emotional confusion and unconscious repression? These are the next points we're going to uncover. And by doing that, you'll be able to clearly see what was once invisible. Now, you might be wondering, if all of this happens beneath the surface, how can you tell when a man is more in love than he realizes? How can you recognize the signs even when he tries to rationalize, pull away, or act cold? The answer lies in the small details, in the movements that escape the ego's control, in micro-expressions, subtle contradictions, gestures that weren't rehearsed. But pay attention, these signs are not obvious. They don't show up in declarations. They don't appear in long messages. And they are rarely confessed. They're hidden in the gaps, in the silences, in the pauses that most people overlook. Jung stated that psychic truth reveals itself in fragments, in what slips out between words. And that means, to truly see the feeling behind the mask, you need to stop listening only to what's being said and start noticing what's being avoided. When he suddenly changes the subject, when he makes a joke to dodge something serious, when he overreacts to a simple question, all of that is a reflection of what he's trying not to feel, or rather, trying not to admit he feels. Another powerful but often overlooked sign is inner conflict, when he gets close intensely and then pulls away, when he makes plans and then cancels, when he shows care but says he's not ready. These patterns are not random. They're a clear expression of a divided psyche, of an unconscious that's been activated by you and of an ego trying to resist the transformation that this activation represents. And the stronger the feeling, the stronger the denial. Because truly loving means losing control. And for someone who learned to survive by controlling everything, that can feel dangerous. But there's an even more revealing pattern, one that Carl Jung only hinted at between the lines, but that completely transforms the way you interpret male behavior. A type of reaction that, when it happens, leaves no doubt that something deeper is going on. Something he hasn't understood yet, but that you can begin to decode. And that's what we're going to explore next, because understanding this doesn't just change the way you see him. It changes how you relate to everyone around you, including yourself. By understanding these signs that Carl Jung helps us interpret, something powerful begins to shift within you. The way you perceive his behavior transforms. What once seemed confusing now starts to make sense. You stop interpreting silence as disinterest and begin to understand it as a reflection of internal conflict. You stop personalizing his coldness and realize that, many times, it's just an unconscious defense mechanism against something that touched him deeply. And it's at this point that change begins. Remember Rick? When Lori understood the invisible layers behind his actions, something also shifted within her. Instead of reacting with hurt or trying to force an answer, she started observing with presence and emotional intelligence. And that created a new field of communication between them, a space where it was no longer necessary to say everything in words, because she had learned to listen with her mind and with her eyes. With that, she not only became emotionally stronger, but also stopped being a prisoner of doubt. And this is one of the greatest benefits of psychological awareness, emotional freedom. When you understand that another person's behavior is often a mirror of their internal battles, you gain power. Not the power to control the other, but the power to not lose yourself. You take a stand from a place of greater stability, calmness, and clarity. And that, paradoxically, increases your presence and your impact. Because people who don't react automatically exert a silent yet intense influence. They disrupt old patterns. They create transformation simply by how they look, listen, and choose to respond. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, begins when we integrate the unconscious into consciousness. And when you apply that to your relationships, you become someone rare. Someone who is no longer desperately seeking approval, but who observes, understands, and feels deeply. Someone who touches others in a way they can't even explain. And that is magnetic. Because deep down, we all long to be truly seen. And the person who can see what others don't becomes unforgettable. That's why the signs you've learned so far are not just clues about his feelings. They are invitations for you to come closer to yourself, to develop a rare sensitivity that will transform not only this relationship, but every other one to come. But what Lori didn't know yet, and maybe you don't either, is that Rick's behavior revealed more than just emotional resistance. There was a deep archetype being activated within him, an ancestral pattern that Jung described in his studies, but that almost no one talks about. Something that emerges when a man is confronted with a feminine energy that touches his unconscious so intensely that he begins to see her not just as a woman, but as a symbol, as a mirror, as both a threat and a salvation at the same time. This archetype, once awakened, has the power to change a person's emotional destiny. But it can also trigger sudden distance, confusion, and even unconscious sabotage. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next video. Because until you understand this hidden pattern, you might be missing the chance to decode something that could change everything. So if you want to dive even deeper into this journey through the unconscious mind, click subscribe now. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in this series. Leave a like if this made sense to you, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Because some people are trapped in emotional patterns and don't even realize it. And this video might be the missing key.